Hi, good morning, and welcome to the ZP vlog and podcast. So we like to do this every Sunday, approximately 8 a.m. Because we're doing more technical webinars these days. We've gone a little bit late today, but let me jump straight into it and just talk about technical news and news that we've put out from ZP during the week. Something that we're kind of super interested in at ZP is really water quality testing. This will come up a little bit later on as well because one of the people interested in water, one of the things that came up today in the ZP Developer Zone webinar was actually water quality. Here, I suppose I should strictly speaking say we're talking about sanitation of water. And free chlorine is a way of sanitizing water, and there's a reagent that kind of reacts with chlorine called DPD, which is, for anyone who likes a little bit of chemistry, it's diethyl phenylene diamine. This diethyl phenylene diamine likes to react with chlorine, and it gives quite a pinkish color. So this test has existed, I believe, since the 50s. I think it was a Dr. Palin apparently originally developed this test. So we're talking something, it's quite a robust test in some ways. We're talking sort of 70 years later now. But at ZP, we do have this technology that kind of says sensor to, sensor to cloud. So that does give an extra dimension actually to this test, because we can put all the data in the cloud. That gives traceability, trackability, and transparency. So we definitely, have brought this up to date. As I say, free chlorine is actually used a lot in sanitation. When you look at the sort of science of water sanitation, it can be quite, I would say simplistic, but it can be quite straightforward, especially from a chemist. There's kind of a range of sanitation tablets exist. These sanitation tablets kind of hydrolyze in water and release the free sort of chlorine. And so a company like ZP, we can kind of come along and confirm that water is actually, there's enough chlorine in there to actually sanitize the water. You can understand that if there's a large bioburden in water, essentially the chlorine is reacting with the organic materials and is essentially diminishing. So then when you put like a molecule like diethyl phenylene diamine in there, it can't react with chlorine because the chlorine's already gone. So there's a good indicator of how much available chlorine actually is by doing these things like DPD testing. Now, I did meet, Sensi-All will be mentioned a lot today, but I've always talked about Sensi-All being available on the Android store. It's also available on the Apple store as well. So the sort of, as we all know, the two big sort of smart device platforms that are out there these days is Android operating systems or Apple's iOS operating systems, and the Sensi-All app, which also applies to FoodSense as well, is also available on the Apple store as well. So really big kudos to the ZP engineers. Really appreciate the work that these guys put in. Something that is kind of relevant to things that come up in the ZP Developer Zone is, a lot of what we do at ZP is, we kind of say, look, if you're trying to make a low-cost biosensor, I think one of the best platforms for this is actually the glucose strip. It teaches you a lot about biosensing, how to make a biosensor, how to make a biosensor work, and so we do we've been putting some material out recently talking about the different aspects of glucose strips, but we've been doing this really in the context of here's how a glucose strips works. By the way, you can also apply it to a biosensor. So we have talked about capillary filling on glucose strips. We've also talked about some of the enzymes or the kinetics of a glucose strip. Now, the fact that I might give a presentation online and I say, here's the small molecule, it happens to be glucose, and here's an electrode. And by the way, side note, if you ever do biosensor development, please go for carbon. Carbon's so much cheaper than gold and platinum. Please go for carbon. I can't say it more. Anyway, I might talk about glucose strips and give a kind of glucose strip example, but please understand that these are generic lessons and they can be applied to other biosensors. Don't think that your biosensor is so unique that it has to be gold or platinum. Please go for carbon. And in fact, when the screen printed electrodes and glucose strips actually teach us a lot. One of the things they teach us is many of the low-cost manufacturers these days are actually chosen carbon. You might as well start with carbon because it always gives you good margin and a good business model. Something that we do a lot of at ZP is obviously, we do, it's not obvious, but we do a lot of what we call developer zone webinars, technical questions coming from the week. And we understand a lot of times these questions, there's no monetary value associated with these questions. Sometimes these questions, are people's homework. Now, I do feel a little bit, that, if somebody's asking me a homework question, but to be honest with you, if I answer a homework question and I show them all my workings out, then hopefully they will get some value from it, and it'll make them a better scientist, eventually. So we do answer a lot of questions. We don't expect a monetary value associated with answering these questions. We do it as part of the service to the overall community. We do ask that, if people can buy ZP potentiostats and ZP screen-printed electrodes. It does really help, of course, so that said, we do answer the questions for free. Also, for me, measuring chloride has always been quite straightforward. It's like we've done for years. And it's just sort of realizing that, there's entire companies and instruments, and I find them quite old-fashioned, actually. But there is a term out there called sort of chloridometer, which chloridometer is easy enough to say, I suppose. But it's really a chloride sensor. They're often using ion selective electrodes. At ZP, we have the world's best platform for making ion selective electrode measurements. It's called SensiAll. And I think we just kind of putting out there a note that, in fact, it does have an ion selective chloride sensor associated with the SensiAll platform, and therefore we can be classified as a chloridometer as well. Really nice question came in this week. At ZP, let's summarize Zimmer Peacock. Zimmer Peacock is sensor to cloud. For technology developers, we describe it as sensor to API, sensor to application program interface. I have a little bit of a problem with that term API because I also spent some of my career in the pharmaceutical industry, and API there means active pharmaceutical ingredient, i.e. the drug. So API, any three-letter acronym, does have different interpretations or different meanings depending on what industry you're in. But at ZP, we're sensor to API. We send sensor data to cloud. One of the systems that we have is FoodSense. Absolutely love FoodSense Generation 4. FoodSense Generation 4, this is 4th generation. We've been running this for years now, and now it's sort of come to this point where it's really cloud enabled. And so we had nice questions in this week for FoodSense, and they're really about measuring green chilies. But the beautiful thing about it is that if these people adopt this technology, they start measuring green chilies and they have a problem, I'm really happy because actually I can see their raw data in real time. I'm supporting somebody at the moment in California with their chili data. It's great because he's running tests. It automatically goes to the cloud. I can just go into the cloud and see it, only because he's decided to share it with me. We've got to understand that data security or that data privacy, only because he's decided to share it with me. So it's nice that we get questions in, can you measure green chilies? Yes, we can. If they buy the instrument, then actually I'll be able to support them online in real time. So that's, it's just a joy to be where we are at today in technology stack. And when I say we, I actually mean the wider society. When you look at technology, I sort of think that, the Babbage machine in terms of computers, I don't know, it was made like 100 years ago. Unix as an operating system started like in the 60s and 70s. There's a moment now where actually everything's come together, and we can have people like us come along, actually measure the capsaicin in chilies in India or California. The data goes to the cloud. At the moment, I can manually get involved with the data, but of course, once you get manually involved with the data, then you can actually, fortunately or unfortunately, replace me then with AI as well. But I'm actually okay with that because, let's allow human beings to be creative. Let's not then do routine data quality checking, for example. Today we did do the ZP Developer Zone. It was really quite nice. We did have a special visitor called Ali. Ali's been a really good friend of the company for years. Really delightful person. Really happy to have him in our friendship circle. And we talked about screen printed carbon electrodes. I've said it a few times today. Please, 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 please. ZP does a hypervalue carbon electrode and a carbon 501. If you're an academic, the 501 is just perfect for you. Easy to use. Super high quality, super reproducibility. question number 2 was really about water quality testing, things like salinity, oxygen, nitrate, phosphate. Actually, they didn't mention potassium, which they should have mentioned really, because that's a runoff from farms, leads to potassium contamination. All that said, delighted to get the question and answered it today in our ZP webinar. Talked about the Sense It All platform. Somebody else, we don't get too much of this, but they were interested in cardiovascular biomarkers. So I said it, ZP, we don't talk about it so much these days because we broaden out, but we are ISO 13485. We just recently did our ISO 13485 audit. We passed it, absolutely no problems. So we live and breathe quality at the heart of ZP, especially in our medical diagnostics products. And so we're happy to get involved in Troponin I. And then somebody else wants to make a multi-analyte tester. They wanted 8. I said, look, if you do 6, it's actually a lot easier for us because we're already quite set up for 6. So I want to sort of say thank you very much for listening to the vlog and podcast this week. If you've got any questions for ZP, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're pretty easy to find. And if your question is not commercial and it's purely technical, you'll also find that we'll answer those questions in our ZP Developers and webinars, which at the moment are happening twice a week because of the volume of questions. Otherwise, have a good day, have a good week, and if you've got any questions, reach out to us. Okay, thanks very much.